All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to clear the tracks. This is a conversation about the ongoing rail crisis and what it's going to take for the working class to win public ownership of the rails. My name is Kelsey. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the co-chair of Atlanta DSA, and I'll be facilitating this call today. So today we're going to hear from DSA chapters from Georgia to Ohio on the work they've been doing to stand up against Norfolk Southern and billionaire rail executives and speak out in solidarity with Ohio residents harmed by recent train derailments. We'll also speak with our friend from Road Workers United, Ross Gruters, about how road workers are organizing and fighting back against capitalist deregulation of the rail industry. And finally, an eco-socialist perspective on the environmental damage caused by Class 1 rail companies and how we can incorporate demands for public ownership of the rails into a campaign to win a Green New Deal. And just to remind people, we're going to drop a few community agreements in the chat. So just keep in mind through the duration of this call, as always, to engage in good faith, keep it positive. We're all here as comrades in the shared fight to win a socialist program and a Green New Deal. So to set the stage, as I'm sure you're all familiar, on February 3rd, a Norfolk Southern train carrying toxic chemicals derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. And you can go to the next slide if you want, or the next slide, which led to a fire and evacuation of thousands of residents on top of environmental devastation, contaminated drinking water, mass death of local wildlife, and unlivable conditions for working people. In the background, Class 1 road companies like Norfolk Southern have for decades, even centuries, exploited road workers to generate a profit. Road workers notoriously endure brutal workplace conditions, they work on call, and are likely to suffer fatal accidents due to overwork and exhaustion. But as billionaire shareholders line their pockets, companies like Norfolk Southern continue to lobby the federal government in favor of industry deregulation, slashing maintenance, staffing, and equipment inspections, increasing the average train size, all at the expense of the health and safety of rail workers and the general public. Road workers themselves have organized in opposition to industry deregulation. This past fall, a majority of road workers nationwide rose up to reject a union contract, which excluded crucial demands like sick leave and better scheduling. But as workers prepared to strike, the Biden administration invoked the antiquated Railway Labor Act, undemocratically crushing the right to strike for thousands of railroad workers standing up for safer working conditions. Decades of capitalist deregulation and attacks on workers' rights have culminated in the derailment of multiple trains over the last few months since the horrific events of February 3rd. In fact, shortly after the East Palestine derailment, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg took to the news in defense of Class 1 railroad companies, claiming that the incident was overhyped since roughly 1,000 trains derail annually in the United States. These numbers are unacceptable, and despite what railroad executives would have you believe, these derailments were entirely avoidable. On the contrary, the fact that accidents such as these are entirely normalized conveys a blatant valuation of profits over human life, the environment, workers' rights on the part of Class 1 railroad companies. Norfolk Southern and other rail companies have a full responsibility to pay back every resident harmed by recent derailments and fund a full cleanup of East Palestine and the surrounding area. Road workers deserve a union contract, which includes basic health and safety provisions like paid sick leave and an end to precision scheduled railroading to prevent massive accidents like this from happening in the future. Rail executives will claim that further regulation of the rail industry will only bankrupt their companies, who are subject to capitalist competition. But the reality is that if these private for-profit companies can't afford to survive and ensure basic health and safety provisions for their workers and the general public, perhaps we need a different solution. And that's why we've come together today with Road Workers United to discuss public ownership of the railroads as a part of our plan to rebuild the labor movement and win a Green New Deal. We can't stop at demanding accountability from capitalist railroad executives. The working class deserves a complete overhaul of the economic system. We need green public infrastructure built by workers for workers. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to our first speaker, Matt from DSA's Green New Deal campaign, who's going to speak about the environmental impacts of the rail crisis and how we as socialists can organize to fight for a green pro-worker solution.
All right. Thank you, Kelsey. That was a great introduction. And as Kelsey said, my name's Matt. I'm currently serve on DSA's National Green New Deal Campaign Commission. I'm so excited to be here to talk with you all about the ecological reasons why we need public ownership of the railroads. Also rocking my amazing real RWU shirt. I think they're sold out, but you should get one if you can. So workers are on the front lines of environmental damage. As we see with East Palestine, as we see with basically all of these things that happen around the planet. We bear the most risk from and exposure to pollution and ecological degradation, both on the job and in the rest of our lives. So basically, we have ecological interests as much as economic ones. And the forces that produce exploitation of labor and non-human nature are one and the same. What we saw in East Palestine is a tale as old as time. A corporation runs roughshod over workers and the planet because people who control it are driven entirely by wealth accumulation, while the ostensible regulators are controlled by or subservient to capital. And like the one that derailed in East Palestine, freight trains crisscross the US all the time on a daily basis, carrying toxic and dangerous substances like plastics and the chemicals and fossil fuels that they're made from, which have social and ecological costs throughout their entire supply chains, not just from the end usage. And this is a reminder of that. And so the quantity and variety of these substances that are produced in this country should not be taken for granted, but neither should the conditions of their transportation. It is unacceptable to have them controlled by profit-driven corporations devoted to keeping costs as low as possible by slashing safety measures and fighting against government regulation. But this isn't even just an issue for freight trains. We also have to dramatically expand passenger rail capacity if we want to build a just and sustainable transportation system. Trains are an outstanding form of moving people around. They're electrifiable, they're energy efficient, and they can and should replace a great deal of more polluting and inefficient modes of transit like cars and planes. But because freight and Amtrak share our inadequate and privately owned railroads, freight is typically given preference, which is why passenger service is often slow and undependable in this country, despite the fact that rail corporations once promised to prioritize passenger trains when this arrangement started. As Kelsey alluded to, the bloated executive salaries and societally useless dividends and stock buybacks we see from rail corporations are theft from their workers and, as a toxic spill in East Palestine shows, from all of us. You might not live in East Palestine, but next time it could be your town. And the burden of this risk is unnecessary and unevenly distributed. It's always going to flow downward to workers like us and to the poor and racialized communities who lack the political power in our society to resist it. The rail system is too important for both our present and future health to leave in the hands of corporations and their wealthy executives and shareholders who focus on profit over the health of people and our planet. We need to nationalize it and bring it under public ownership. Disasters like the one in East Palestine and the ones that happen every day all around this country show how labor and environmental justice are fundamentally intertwined. So our struggles and policies we fight for to materially prioritize workers and to prevent pollution must be combined as well. And that's what we're doing in the DSA Green New Deal campaign, especially with our new Building for Power campaign. You can go to the next slide. So a great example of what I'm talking about is the UE Green Locomotive Project. And UE is the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America. So the pollution from old diesel trains is particularly devastating to workers in rail yards and in the surrounding communities where those rail yards are located, which again are often predominantly poor, Black, or brown And this project emerged from UE union members who build these dirty trains and want to work towards a just transition to an ecologically sustainable future by switching to building more efficient and zero emission alternatives, which we have. Naturally, the profit-driven corporations are not doing this, especially not on the timescale we need. So the Green Locomotive Project will create good union jobs. It will reduce planet warming greenhouse gas emissions, and it will clean up the deadly particulate pollution in the working class communities of color, which bear the brunt of it. It shows how we can bridge the causes of labor and environmental justice to demand and win a world based around the flourishing of human and non-human nature instead of profit, one where the railroads are owned by and for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. The Green New Deal campaign has been doing great work to connect these issues with the on-the-ground work that local chapters are doing. Next, we'll hear from Glenn from Mahoning Valley DSA, who's going to talk about the important local work that they've been doing to support and connect with impacted Ohio residents on the ground.
Hello, everybody. I'm Glenn. If it's okay, I'll keep my video off. I'm just on our cellular network. Our power is out currently. So I will go ahead and just talk a little bit about some of the things on the ground. When this happened, our chapter went and started going into East Palestine. They are in Columbiana County, predominantly white and a rural neighborhood. And collection of towns. We started going there to see what was happening, what the response was from people. We were not sure exactly what to expect. A few things that we saw right away is there was really a big need for air filters, water filters, because people were being told that their water was safe, their air was safe, and it was not. They didn't trust what was being told by Norfolk Southern, who hired their own testers. And then the EPA of Ohio was also telling everybody that the water and the air was all safe, nothing to worry about, but folks were not wanting those. So we worked with different organizations within Northeast Ohio and around, including Akron and Columbus DSA, the Northeast Ohio and Central Ohio Socialist Rifle Associations, Food Not Bombs, Sunrise Movement, and we created a mutual aid fund that within about a week raised roughly $15,000. And we've been going in weekly, helping distribute supplies. We've got air filters for folks, shower filters that can filter water that people are showering with. And then cleaning supplies as well. We currently, the fund is sitting on about $50,000 that we are looking at distributing. We are making a canvas sheet that we are going to go out into the East Palestine community to canvas for specific needs, so we can update our buy list for folks and help build power locally. Some of the takeaways that we are finding as we go through here is not only are the test results coming back that dioxin levels in the area are they did not test for those initially, and we were told that we did not need to test for them. They weren't something important. But now they have switched to saying they are testing for them, but the readings that they're taking aren't sensitive enough to actually capture dangerous levels of dioxin. So they can only capture dioxin levels that are almost 7 times higher than the safety recommended amount. So it's an ongoing issue. In addition, the EP actual testers and the cleanup workers from Norfolk Southern themselves are both falling sick. And this is as they're saying that things are safe and the people in the town could go back to their homes. So that's sort of the ongoing situation on the ground and what we are doing to solve it.
Awesome. Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, it's important to remember that these disasters touch real people's lives. And so it's good. It's great that we have DSA members on the ground connecting with the most impacted people and surveying their needs. So next we're going to hear from Ricardo from YDSA at Georgia Tech, who is going to speak about the recent rally that we held outside the Norfolk Southern headquarters and their chapter's plans to escalate demands for Georgia Tech to sever ties with Norfolk Southern.
Cool, thanks, Kelsey. So I'm Ricardo, he, him. I'm the co-chair and education co-chair for the YDSA chapter at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. We've been involved in a lot of local work this semester. So on campus, we've been working to increase counselor salaries, develop a career fair that excludes like pretty obviously immoral companies like war profiteers and oil producers, and just generally educate students on leftism. And then off campus, we've been very involved in the Stop Cop City movement. So we've, held a protest on campus and had educational sessions. And our most recent protest has been at the Norfolk Southern headquarters. We worked with Atlanta DSA and also with Railroad Workers United to incorporate environmental demands, as well as those of residents and workers. And we also contacted journalists so we'd get news coverage. The protest itself went great. We had a lot of speakers who talked about all sorts of issues surrounding the derailment. And we also had both a local activist and someone who had been poisoned previously by derailments come speak. And I should note that the reason that we were able to hold this protest at the Norfolk Southern headquarters is because they are literally about 5 minutes from our campus walking. And this is strategic. So if you look at the Midtown area of Atlanta, 20, 30 years ago, a lot of it was fields, small buildings, little homes. Now you have these huge corporations, Accenture, NCR, Google, Microsoft, Norfolk Southern. And, they've all moved in the last several years because they like having this huge source of potential labor from our campus. And they make the culture at our school more toxic. There's always companies here that are looking for students. They have tables set up, they hand out merch. You step outside, you see the buildings. There's always this immense pressure to keep up. He got an internship here, she got an offer there. What am I doing? I'm looking at the news. I'm getting worried about the future. I need a way to make money. And then you end up getting sucked in, even if you came in with other ideas. And it's really insidious. I mean, these companies, they try to speak on our terms. They know that many of us deeply care about the planet and that we want to make a difference. So they use this language when they try to establish themselves on our campus. Norfolk Southern in particular has recently established this so-called sustainability program with Georgia Tech. They've donated $750,000 to our school to continue these appearances. When you read their website, they love talking about their commitment to sustainability. And, I think it's important to recognize that our institution is just as predatory and capitalist as Norfolk Southern is, if not more. Our, industrial engineers will go into consulting and help optimize, which is usually just fancy language for, we cut costs by finding people that are easier to exploit overseas. Our business people will go work for major corporations. Our liberal arts people will go, into marketing. Our software engineers help make Facebook more attractive to users. And our very mayor, who is desperately trying to force Cop City on us, even though most of Atlantans don't want it, is a tech grad, and tech, loves mentioning it. So we understand as leftists that this system is not going to change overnight. We need to take advantage of public opinion. And right now it's very obvious to everyone. I mean, leftists, liberals, conservatives, Norfolk Southern fucked up. So we start here. And we demand that Georgia Tech cut ties with Norfolk Southern until the area is adequately cleaned, until local ecosystems are stable, until residents of East Palestine are reimbursed for their decreased property values and medical bills and general suffering, and until the company installs adequate safety measures on their trains that actually work and Norfolk Southern actually responds to the demands of their employees. We need to remember that all of these are connected. The reason that the derailment happened is the reason they don't want to pay residents, and the reason they don't want to give workers sick days, and the reason that they won't install safety features. All that these freaks care about is just seeing that line go up, 9:30 on Monday morning. They're not interested in thinking 10, 20 years down the line, even 6 months down the line. They want money and they want it now, so they can lobby Congress more, so they can suck more of us students into their company, so they can keep funding projects like Cop City. They've donated actually publicly at least $100,000 to the Atlanta Police Foundation, privately probably more. And this obviously will help police crush environmental protests in the future as our planet continues to burn and as our ecosystems continue to die. So as of right now, we're campaigning with United Campus Workers. We have a wonderful relationship with them. Actually, several of us, including myself, are in the union, and we'd like to get a resolution passed to support public ownership of rails and expand our reach beyond just students, but also getting, lecturers, professors, custodians, dining hall workers, landscapers, administrators on board with this petition to cut ties with Norfolk Southern. So a lot of us are going to be tabling, flyering around campus, dropping information in group chats. We're going to be starting conversations with locals, contacting local journalists while this energy is still very fresh. And if enough people get involved, tech is not going to have a choice but to cut ties with Norfolk Southern. Thank you everyone for coming, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to us.
Thank you, Ricardo, for highlighting all of those intersecting issues at play here. It's definitely going to be beneficial to have students and staff, everyone in the surrounding community and at the university involved in this push. And next we are going to hear from Ian from Metro Cincinnati DSA about the campaign that they are getting ready to launch in their chapter.
Yeah, thank you. Great to see all you guys out here. I'm Ian. I'm from DSA Cincinnati in Metro Northern Kentucky. I'm the vice chair of the labor committee there, and I use he, him pronouns. I'd just like to take some time right now to tell you all about the microcosm of all of this that is happening in Cincinnati. So for context, right here at Cincinnati Southern Railroad, we have the last municipally owned railroad in the country, and it's currently under threat of being sold to Norfolk Southern, which is the same company that we've been talking about this whole time that's responsible for all these safety hazards, derailments, unfair treatments of workers, everything bad that we've talked about. They're trying to buy our railroad. They've been leasing our railroad for decades, I think over a century at this point, and they first expressed the intention to buy it on November 21st, 2022. Currently, the sale is expected to go through for $1.62 billion, which is on the low end of what the rail is worth, especially considering that it is one of the only routes that Norfolk Southern has access to go south from Cincinnati, and it connects to Chattanooga. Also, the estimation that was used to get to the $1.62 billion figure was on the low end of the estimations. There are a few methods that were able to be used to evaluate the cost of the rail, and they chose one of the lowest. And it gets even worse because while it's unclear what exactly the proceeds may be used for, officials in Cincinnati, I believe including our mayor, Aftab Purival, have expressed interest in using the money to revamp the police headquarters and support institutions along those lines. So through all of this, it's very negative. We don't want to see the last municipally owned railroad be sold. Obviously, it's much harder to go back from it's much easier to expand public ownership from here than to go back once we've lost the last municipally owned railroad. So the solace here is that a law in Ohio states that the sale has to go to Cincinnati voters before it can be officially approved. And as of this Friday, a transportation bill was passed that says that the sale will be on the ballot with some caveats. On the positive side of those caveats, the language of the ballot item has to contain Norfolk Southern so that people know who we're selling the rail to, and the item can only be voted on one time. So if we're able to succeed now, then we've won. On the negative side, though, it's unclear when the item will be on the ballot. The two most probable scenarios are this August ballot, because there's currently a special election in Ohio to raise the threshold for constitutional amendments to 60% to prevent a pro-abortion constitutional amendment. So Norfolk Southern could be added to that special election, or it could be on the November ballot, which is what we're hoping for. It could technically extend into next year, but because of arbitration agreements and things like that, it's unlikely to. So moving on from all of that, I'd like to talk a little bit about DSA Cincy and what we're working on regarding this. We're currently bringing a motion through the Labor Committee and to the general body later this month that would establish a campaign around the sale. So as it stands now, there are two main things we can do here. For one, before the ballot date is clear, we can petition the officials who have power over the sale. Cincinnati Southern Railway's Board of Trustees is about as undemocratic as you'd expect. They're all elected by Mayor Aftab Purival. And while that is awful for democracy, it does give us a clear target for a petition, which is one facet of the campaign. On that front, anti-sale sentiment, and anti-sale statements are always appreciated. And then Avenue 2 is an electoral campaign. Once it's more clear when the sale will be on the ballot, there's been a sign-up form linked in the chat called Rail Form. On there, you'll see options of canvassing, phone banking, and text banking. They're all great options. Once we are more clear on the motion, if it passes in a general, it would be great to have a list of people to reach out to hit the ground running on this campaign. It's important. It's going to be decided in a few months. And we'd love to connect with other chapters as well. And I appreciate you all listening to me.
Thank you, Ian. If people are interested in volunteering to help Metro Cincinnati DSA, we've dropped this link in the chat, dsausa.us/railforum. If you want to help text bank, phone bank, drive up to Canvas with them, fill out this form and you will get followed up with. I think they need all the help that they can get in this fight. So next, we are going to hear from Heather from DSA Labor, who's going to talk a bit about public ownership of the rails and what DSA can do to get involved in this fight.
Hey folks, it's me, Heather Hillenbrand, your friendly DSA Labor co-chair. And so some of you may know I'm from Ohio, right? Perhaps I'm extra worked up about this because I'm Ohio, but let me tell you, like, we're really hurting right now. And on the ground, there are other people who are organizing around rails, and those people are fascists and Nazis mostly. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but like they're kind of winning in Ohio. It's very scary for me as a queer person living in this state that like the right is having so much more success than the left, which is why it is amazing to see my comrades on the ground in Mahoning Valley and Cincinnati, like really at the front of this fight. And I am gonna ask you as fellow DSA members and or people who are interested in rail solidarity to go ahead and keep following this and to stay with us on this, because we need all the help we can get. And this could be the forefront of a very important battle to win important gains for the working class more broadly, both for rail workers who, as we know through the last contract cycle, I mean, these people are getting hammered. They have some of the most difficult and dangerous working conditions in the country right now. They have very little relief. And unfortunately, their unions have been historically neglected and are not really in fighting shape. So as a fellow labor person, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, if you are interested in getting a rank and file job, there's no way you can show more solidarity with rail workers than actually getting a rail job. Now, if that's not in the cards for you, I understand that, but I really encourage you to follow the Green Locomotive Project and follow RWU and find out what their daily issues are. RWU in particular puts out a great news bulletin that will tell you about the issues of rail workers every week. And then to also stay in touch with DSA on this, right? So I am optimistic that we can build an organization that can fight to win big national issues like this, but it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of work. I'm going to keep it real with everyone on this call. Like, DSA is not strong enough right now to win big national demands. And frankly, we saw that in the last rail contract fight. If we had a Congress full of people who are willing to go to town for rail workers, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now, but we do not. That is not where we are. I do think it is incredibly important. We had some questions about regulation and legislation. I think that's an incredibly important front for us to be fighting on here. But we also have to fight on the front of labor. The essential piece here, right? Like, any kind of contract campaign that rail workers can put together, we have to be ready to back them 100%. And the exciting thing about looking at this on a national scale is we do have this national rail contract wherein 13 different rail unions are negotiating for better pay and working conditions and safer conditions for all of us. It's coming up cyclically that has a definite choke point where, in theory, we could actually shut things down. I'm not saying that's where we are today. It takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of building to get there. But I do believe that we can get there. I also believe that this is a deeply and widely felt issue and that people in your communities and your chapter really are going to want to talk to you about this. I know now, after East Palestine, every time I hear a train go by my house, which is about 6 to 8 times a day for me, but many people in urban communities live very close to rail infrastructure, I think about this, right? You think about, like, well, what if it's this one? What if it's this one? And eventually it will be for all of us. Like, that's the trajectory rail is on now. We're approaching such a crisis. I do believe that the government will have to do something about this. And I believe that most people in communities adjacent to rail infrastructure do actually care about this issue. I have not stopped anywhere in my travails around the Midwest in recent months where someone hasn't brought it up to me and asked me if I knew anyone there. And unfortunately, I do know people who are directly affected by the East Palestine derailment. And I don't want to know more people who are directly affected by these issues. So I really want to encourage you to fill out these forms. And if you are at all familiar with me or just want to get in touch, I will be happy to send you some more stuff that we were working on at a national level. Hopefully we can get some rail organizing going for a national campaign in the future, but it's going to take all of you building on the work of these chapters that you've heard from on this call, as well as work to contact your own chapter members and your own community members and get them on board for winning big demands for the working class. Once again, this takes time, this takes a lot of effort, but I believe that we can win. Kelsey, is Ross able to come on?
Ross, if you were in the chat, we would like to promote you to panelist if possible, but you need to accept the invitation.
Why is it not bringing up the chat?
Oh, there we go. Ross is
Oh,
here.
there we go. Okay, I'll let Ross finish this out. I just wanted to make one distinction here that we're talking about some technical stuff. So we're talking about the nationalization. In the case of the rails, I think some of our comrades who are a little bit more familiar with technicalities on rail will explain to you that from a logistics sense, having a nationally coordinated rail system does make a lot of sense. We are also saying public ownership because we believe in democratic worker control, both in our communities and in our workplaces. So what we want to do here is create a socialist future using rail as the vehicle, in theory, to win big demands for the working class. So long-term goals, that's what we're doing. We are bringing democracy to our workplaces, to our infrastructure, and to all our communities. Who better to wrap this up, though, than hear from an actual rail worker themselves, Ross. So I'm going to hand it off. I believe that the working class is going to win. I'm out here grinding every day for it, and I know that y'all are with me and that together a better future is possible. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. I'm Ross Gritters. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a lifetime DSA member. I'm also co-chair for Railroad Workers United. We're a rank and file led cross-craft organization of railroad workers and solidarity members. Most of you are probably familiar with who we are and what our work is. I've lived in Iowa with my family for the better part of 3 decades and been on the railroad for 20 years of that as a BLET and Teamsters Rail Conference union member. So most of the folks on the call are probably going to be familiar with what happened late last year. We covered it early in the call, and we've had some great panelists already talking about what is happening on the railroad. So I'm going to try to cover what RWU has been doing in the last few months. And I really like what Matt laid out in the beginning, laying out 3 things that are, I think, really important to reiterate here. Trains are about 3 times more energy efficient in moving long haul freight across our nation. We cannot have a solid nationwide passenger system under this current system that's dominated by for-profit freight railroads. And we're really all suffering the effects of externalized costs of greedy for-profit railroad companies run by billionaire capital. So setting the record straight on derailments, I hear a lot of numbers thrown around. And unfortunately, I think a lot of those numbers include things like grade crossing incidents, which of course we want to prevent with pedestrians and vehicles. So the numbers can be somewhat misleading, but the fact is longer and heavier trains not only lead to increased frequency and derailments, but they also lead to more disastrous derailments. And it's not, as others have said, it's not a matter of if these things are going to occur in the future, it's when. So what has RWU been doing? Late last year, we decided to pursue a campaign for public ownership. We had been talking about it for a number of years and decided that this was the moment that we needed to do it. And unfortunately, the recent string of derailments, including the incredibly tragic derailment in East Palestine, have really highlighted why we need to do this. So we've gone out to enlist allies, and one of those allies has been DSA. We've heard about the work that DSA chapters are doing, what YDSA is doing. We've tried to help coordinate those events. I was really excited to see the YDSA slide with RWU's logo down in Georgia Tech. That work like that is amazing. And last March we had coordinated efforts in multiple locations, including Norfolk, with another ally, the Southern Workers Assembly. So we want to continue to have rail safety actions in the future. We're going to keep working to build that. But to build a public ownership campaign it's a pretty daunting task. We're all working railroaders. We have full-time jobs operating trains and keeping freight moving across the country. So we've really had to reach out and get some external help to help develop a plan, a strategic plan that's long-term and includes a vision that has steps such as putting out public white papers, policy papers, perhaps pushing for legislation, though I think others are better equipped to do that, nationwide rail safety events, and then fundraising to just build the power necessary that we need. There's people power and there's money power. And I learned a long time ago in organizing that, we can't outspend the corporations, but we do still need those financial resources to move campaigns forward. So we still want to work with partners such as DSA to move this campaign forward. Personally, I'm helping to work a resolution that hopefully we can present at convention to help solidify and continue that work moving forward. But if you can, just go to railroadworkersunited.org. As Heather said, you can sign up for our newsletter and stay in touch. I think many of you already are. And you can also get in touch with me that way as well. I appreciate everyone being here, and together I think we can keep pushing this campaign forward. I think it's really critical as we look at what's happening in Cincinnati. The city doesn't deserve to get, the residents of that city have such a resource that it doesn't need to be fleeced out from underneath them for pennies on the dollar. And we need to grow that. We need to see growth in that, like we've seen recently in Virginia pursuing public railroads. We need to continue the media push. I see the in these times article up there. It's great to see cover stories like that and work with good journalists like Carrie Liderson. And that's a key part of RWU's strategy as well going forward, is just to continue to build public support and a public narrative for ownership of, by, and for the people.
Thank you, Ross. That was awesome. We do have a few questions from the chat if you'd like to try to tackle some of them. So we have one question about, I mentioned in the introduction that railroad workers suffer accidents often from overwork and abusive scheduling, things like that. So there's a question about examples of that. And there's another question about how can Congress support rail workers and safety issues for train workers? I guess their question is essentially like, what is the demand for Congress in terms of protecting railroad workers' rights?
Yeah, fatigue has been an issue on the railroad. Much, if not most, of the employees that are working over the road freight are on call 24/7. They have no set days off and very little advance notice of when they're going to work. We're talking hours. So in that environment, it is hard to imagine, especially as railroads have used precision scheduled railroading to push fewer workers to do more work faster. Accidents are going to happen in that environment, and we're seeing that. What we can do about that is we can take ownership of those entities and make sure that the workers doing the work are taken care of. If we're such a valuable industry that we have to have Congress step in and take action to keep us working and to keep the nation's freight moving, then we should probably take care of the workers doing that work. As far as specific demands for Congress, we will go through a contract process again, and we'll have to have some sort of strategy and contract campaign around that. I think part of that is, especially if we have a favorable administration, again, quote unquote favorable, is telling them to stay out of it. You know, if it would have been a completely different scenario if Joe Biden had said, well, we're going to give workers what they want if you don't go to the negotiating table and settle a contract with these workers. But Biden instead chose some sort of wishy-washy middle ground. So that there's one thing that you can tell Congress is to make sure that they're supporting the workers, not the corporations. The second thing, I think we just need to keep pushing for public ownership. My opinion is that no amount of regulation is going to fix this thing. We could have Congress step in and pass all kinds of regulatory reforms tomorrow. And unfortunately, because of the deferred maintenance, we're going to continue to see the trends go the way they are, even with, say, shorter trains or two-person crew protections, with looking at gross tonnage, some of the things that Congress may or may not effectively do right now. I don't think that the railroads have much of a concern. In fact, they can just wait it out and get a different administration who's more favorable and overturn those things anyway, or just completely ignore them, which is often, unfortunately, what they do. So in my mind, the solution is the public ownership campaign is pushing for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ross. Anything else you'd like to add before we segue into the last little bit?
Nope.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We're so happy to be working with Road Workers United in this fight. So with that, we're going to transition into the last bit of our call today, if I can pull up my agenda, which is hidden. All right, so I hope that everybody learned a lot today, but we want to make sure that we're leaving people with actual next steps and action items, because combating the rail crisis and standing with road workers is really important. And it's equally important that as socialist organizers, we take it upon ourselves to organize and bring these next steps to our DSA chapters, our union locals, and our workplaces. So if you are a union member, we're going to drop in the chat a template resolution that you can bring back to your own union. It's a resolution in support of public ownership for the rails. This is a great way to get rank and file members of your union involved, try to pass this, and just spread the amount of people who are fighting for public ownership of the rail and building support within the labor movement. And if you are a DSA member and want to get your chapter started on organizing to support public ownership of the railroads or supporting road workers and what they're doing, we are dropping some resources in the chat. And some of the good ways that you can get started on building a campaign in your local chapter is doing list work, internal list work. You can launch a labor survey to survey your own chapter membership and see where folks work, see where they have union membership, who works in what industries, and see if any of your own members work for the railroads. You can sign up to have a list work training with our labor staffer, Amanda, and really get a hold of your list and where your members work. You can also do external list work and mapping of your local labor movement. So you can maintain a list of local unions in your area, or community organizations or environmental organizations who may have a stake in organizing around the railroad crisis. You can keep a list of national and local contract expirations for unions in your area. These are really good things that you can do to get your labor organizing in your local chapter off the ground, and definitely essential for any kind of campaign around public ownership of the rails. And finally, we've been dropping this link a whole bunch in the chat. The dsausa.us/railforum link, if you want to get involved in what Cincinnati DSA is doing in canvassing to stop Norfolk Southern from getting ownership of their local rails. You can volunteer to phone bank, canvass, text bank with them, or just indicate interest in any kind of organizing around public ownership of the rails that DSA might do. So I hope everybody's walking away today with some solid next steps, whether you're hoping to volunteer locally or nationally, or you're just following along. Otherwise, we're reaching the end of our call. And so thank you so much for our panelists for taking the time to discuss all the work that you're doing on the ground in your unions and your DSA chapters. This is a really big issue, and it's going to take a lot for us to wrap our heads around what it would take to win ultimately public ownership of the rails. But it's definitely a demand that we should be incorporating into our vision to build the labor movement, build solidarity with unions, and win a Green New Deal. And it's important to remember that between all of these intersecting issues, whether it's environmental devastation, climate change, corporate lobbying, workers' rights, or profit hoarding, that the common through line is capitalism. And we need more than just Band-Aid solutions and mitigating harm done by the billionaire class. We need a socialist pro-worker vision to change these systems from the ground up. And we need all of you in this fight. So please, again, if you haven't, fill out the contact form that we've dropped in the chat, and we can follow up with you about next steps and getting involved. So again, thank you all for joining this call today. It will be recorded, and we'll send a follow-up email with all the relevant links and the recording. And I hope everybody has a great Sunday.